Robbie.
Americans loved it. The emotional connection had been established. Previously characterless grain was now charged with meaning. Across the Atlantic in 1954, Britain finally abandoned food rationing. So when ITV launched a year later, it was the perfect opportunity for the Americans to swoop. First into bat was Tony the Tiger.
Hey, folks, they're great!
You could actually buy the nation in one night. And that was remarkable. So you could launch a product on a Thursday. By Friday, by Saturday, people were in the shop buying it. I mean, phenomenal.
British companies like Weetabix, who had no experience of TV advertising, were trounced.
One of the problems was, of course, although TV advertising was really quite an invention at that point, it was also quite expensive. And everyone was used to using press and not used to using television at all. And Weetabix used press quite extensively.
But by then, Kellogg's was outselling all its rivals put together. The competition had to spend heavily just to stay in the game.
In the late 60s, our advertising spend was probably about a quarter of the selling price of a case of Weetabix.
The route to success was clear. Heavy spending on advertising means powerful imagery, brand loyalty, and boxes flying off the shelf. It remains so today. More money is spent on advertising cereal than on any other food. Kellogg spends more than all its UK rivals put together.
We spend about $1 billion globally. It's essential for the vitality and health of the category because the category remains vital, healthy, relevant to the consumer. It's essential for the brands to differentiate themselves so that they're picking yours off the shelf versus another brand or even a lower price competitor.
By the 1960s, Britain was changing. It was a time of optimism, and the years of austerity and tradition were being cast off. The perfect environment for a food that sold itself as modern, aspirational, and now food for now people.
During the 60s and 70s, there was a kind of conflict between the traditional English breakfast, represented by bacon and eggs, and breakfast cereal.
Cereal is the template for elevating convenience as the be-all and end-all of what, what food is.
It wasn't enough to push a product on taste. They needed to project a lifestyle. Cereals declared war on the cooked breakfast.
I think the battle between the egg and the cereal is a battle between two ways of life. The egg stands for wholesome family and country life. The cereal stands for city life, employment, new ways of thinking, speed, modernity in general.
Faye Weldon was on the front line. She was an advertising copywriter. One of her clients was the Egg Marketing Board.
At the time, breakfast cereals were the enemy of the egg. So we were, in a way, at war.
1 out of the total of 12 thought.
I don't think we saw it so much as a threat. Breakfast cereals were something new. It was more convenient. It was easier to prepare.
They were trying to persuade everybody that all they needed was a light breakfast, while we were trying to persuade them that what they needed was a good breakfast, and a good breakfast meant eggs.
Faye and her team fought back with one of the most famous ad slogans of all time.
Go to work on an egg.
Despite spending almost £1 million a year and hiring household names, the egg struggled to be cool.
So, I shall just have to go to work on an egg.
Yes.
3 spinning top. You get one inside every packet.
The next wave in the savvy American invasion would outflank the traditional British breakfast. The marketing gurus had gone beyond pushing such mundane considerations as taste and cost.
Submarine dead ahead. Stand by.
They unleashed their secret weapon, the free gift in every box.
And no ordinary sub either. It's a real working model of the world's first atomic power sub, which dives and surfaces in...
One I remember particularly, because I was still at school, were the toy submarines. I remember playing with those with my brother and see who could win in terms of going to the bottom and then getting to the top again.
The giveaways became ever more ambitious. From the end of the Second World War to 1970, UK cereal sales tripled.
The things that we put in the packs, the back panel promotions, was really all part of building a relationship, a more detailed relationship with the consumer.
That's the first prize in Kellogg's Woman Dream House competition.
Oh, shut up! Let me get on with my breakfast.
The egg marketers cracked under cereal's pressure. Eventually, the go-to-work on an egg campaign was dropped. American branded culture had changed our way of life.
In the 1950s, you have maybe 50% of people still eating a cooked breakfast of some form or other, even that, if that's only a boiled egg. By the 1970s, that's gone down to about 20%.
So that was the end of that, and actually the end of my job, as I remember.
The food industry offered an alternative to cooking, because that's where the big profits lay. It had discovered that transforming cheap commodities like grain into premium products like breakfast cereals was the ultimate recipe for success.
We take the kernel, we take out the germ, because the germ contains the most oil, and that would go rancid in cornflakes if we didn't take it out. We also take off the skin, because that helps the flavours, the sugar, the salt and the malt to penetrate. We then cook it, dry it down, roll it out, and then we toast the finished product.
Breakfast cereals are the archetypal processed food. You start with a whole grain, but then you process it, you strip it of anything that slows down eating. You add reinforcing substances. You add sugar to it. You add other stimuli to it. You make it into a habit. You add the emotional gloss of advertising. You add toys to it. You make it part of the routine. You make it something that is socially acceptable.
A kilo of corn costs around 15 pence. On the high street, a kilo of Kellogg's cornflakes comes to £3, a 2,000% difference. This process of buying low and selling high is known in the business as adding value. It's what the modern food industry does.
The way you make money is to process food as much as possible, add value to it, add convenience, add packaging, add health claims, whatever you can do, complicate it essentially. And you get people to pay for other things besides the very cheap commodities at the bottom of the food chain.
In simple terms, if you're selling something with added value, it's something where you have turned the raw material into something that the consumer either couldn't or wouldn't do themselves, and they're therefore prepared to pay for it.
Breakfast cereals are at the heart of this equation. We pay more because we believe we don't have any time.
The kind of foods which have won out have been things like breakfast cereal, which require no cooking, no skills. You don't even need a kitchen, you just need a bowl, a spoon, a bit of milk and the packet.
Breakfast was the first meal conquered by convenience foods. And at a time of day when speed is prized, the food business was pushing against an open door.
The whole cultural patterns changed with the rise of processed foods, and it's led by processed foods, but you can't pretend there's no demand. There are changes in family structures, in working lives that are very much they're interdependent. But what you see is a sort of breakdown in that whole cultural conditioning, the socialization that comes with people preparing food together, sitting down and eating together.
On both sides of the Atlantic, the 60s was the golden age of food processing. The American dream began the moment you woke up. The cereal business had ballooned in value to almost $1 billion. The food industry seemed to offer convenience, choice, and plenty, like never before.
Hunger is hard to recognize.
On May the 21st, 1968,
We know it in
CBS broadcast a game-changing documentary.
These children, all of them, are Americans, and all of them are hungry.
It would trigger a national debate about nutrition, which would in turn put cereal in the dock.
A quarter of San Antonio's Mexican Americans.
Watching the broadcast was future presidential candidate Senator George McGovern.
The camera focused on this little guy, and they said, "What do you think when you come here every day and you watch the other children eat?"
Are you ashamed?
Are you ashamed?
Yeah, they're hard.
Why are you ashamed?
I don't have one.
I said, "You know, it's not that little guy who should be ashamed. It's Senator George McGovern."
McGovern, a confidant of JFK, set up a Senate committee to investigate hunger in America and broader concerns about the American diet. One of the first people to testify before the committee was Robert Choate, a wealthy engineer and self-styled food campaigner.
What started out as issues about poverty and malnutrition quickly morphed, as he worked with Senator McGovern, into issues about the quality of food.
Our children are deliberately being sold the cereal sponsors' less nutritious products over television.
He focused on breakfast cereals primarily because he was disturbed about the manufacturers putting sugar coating. He thought that children were getting too much sugar in the diet. He felt it was a real threat to their nutritional health.
Cereals were the first big fight over these issues, and you had this period in the 70s where people looked a lot at sugar, and they looked a lot at marketing to kids and commercials for cereals on television.
Choate looked at 60 major cereals on the market in the US, and he ranked them in a scoring system out of 900, with 900 being nutritionally brilliant and 0 being completely worthless. And what he found was that out of those 60, 40 of them scored under 100, which effectively made them, as he put it, no better than drinking a shot of whiskey.
Each has a TV budget over $500,000 a year. None are in the top 9 nutritionally. All contain sugar.
Furthermore, nutrients and fiber are removed in the process of making some cereals.
Bob Choate coined the phrase empty calories, and that phrase caught on and is still very much referenced today. And typically it is a phrase that's used to denote foods that provide only calories with no nutrients. Unfortunately, the term was ascribed to cereal.
And this electrified America. It really took them by storm, because up to that point, so many people had thought cereals are really healthy, they're really good for you. And he's suddenly pointing out that actually in an experiment done on rats, they were better off eating the cereal box with some milk than they would have been eating the contents inside.
Well, Mr. Choate, what are you trying to prove?
I wanted to show that here in this supremely profitable division of the food industry with sales of almost $1 billion a year, the ethics of the advertising department and television department has not kept up with the ethics of the food researchers who can turn out better food products.
If you go back to the 1970s and you look at what Robert Choate and Senator McGovern did, was they changed the way we began to look at food. It was the opening salvo in what would occupy a lot of attention over the next 4 or 5 decades.
Sugar and grain was a lucrative combination, and the cereal companies weren't about to abandon it.
Every time we conducted hearings that led us to recommend certain changes or regulations on the food industry, they opposed it. And I think without exception, that was